KPBS On Demand is supported by Paint Care, offering households and businesses in California more than 800 leftover paint drop-off sites for recycling. Quantities of 100-plus gallons of paint may qualify for a large volume pickup. Learn more at paintcare.org.
Welcome back to the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. If the name Edgar G. Ulmer doesn't ring a bell, then let me give you a hint. He's a filmmaker. IMDb lists nearly 100 films for him between 1920 and 1964. So if you're still drawing a blank on Ulmer's name, then you need to do two things. Seek out his films, many available on YouTube, and read the new biography on him, Edgar G. Ulmer, A Filmmaker at the Margins, by Noah Isenberg. Isenberg is director of screen studies at the New School. He says he became interested in Ulmer because Ulmer was such a famous and indeed infamous storyteller. Ulmer began his filmmaking career doing set and production design work in the 1920s for acclaimed directors like F.W. Murnau, Fritz Lang, and Ernst Lubitsch. Ulmer made his directing debut on the 1930 film People on a Sunday. Despite his association with Austrian and German émigré directors who would find fame in Hollywood, celebrity would prove elusive for Ulmer, and he ended up at such unglamorous places as Hollywood's netherworld known as Poverty Row. Yet he still managed to deliver a strikingly diverse array of work, ranging from the darkly atmospheric Boris Karloff Bela Lugosi star The Black Cat, to the all-black cast of Moon Over Harlem, to the classic noir Detour. Ulmer was amazingly prolific. He consistently made visually dynamic films on painfully small budgets from the 1930s to 1950s. He may not have had money, but he had style to burn, as well as a burning passion to make movies. And that's what was celebrated Sunday night at the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival in San Diego. Here's audio from the panel that Horrible Imaginings Festival director Miguel Rodriguez moderated before the screening of Ulmer's 1944 film Bluebeard. The film starred John Carradine as the infamous serial killer. The panelists were Ulmer's daughter, Arianne Ulmer Cipes, and his biographer, Noah Isenberg. Before hearing the lively panel discussion, let's start with a trailer for Bluebeard.
He searched for the beauty hidden in woman's heart. In his arms, many women were beautiful, but the flame of passion exposed the ugliness of their souls. Ugliness he destroyed. He searched on and on until he found Lucille.
I want to tell you something that no other living person knows. Then maybe you'll understand how much I do love you.
Then you think the owner of this cravat is the murderer?
Very likely. Lucille! You couldn't do that to me. Not you, Lucille. And even if you could, I wouldn't let you. I wouldn't let you turn against me, too. Oh, no, not you, Lucille. Not you. Quickly! Honor! Once again!
So, hi. What is your name and what do you do?
My name is Arianne Ulmer. Can you hear me? And I am the daughter of Edgar G. Ulmer, but I myself had a varied career within the motion picture medium. First of all, I was brought up on the set from my second day of life, since my mother was ransomed out of her hospital, which was a maternity hospital, by the money that had been collected from the crew on the green fields. And the second day, they let me out with my mother, and she went directly to be the script supervisor.
So, that's a great line.
Yes. On the set, and I was literally nursed on the set, and everybody took care of me on the crew whenever she was busy. They handed me around.
It explains a lot.
I now have the Edgar G. Ulmer Preservation Corp., which is a nonprofit, and our activity is dedicated to the preservation of Ulmer's works. The print that you're going to see tonight literally was preserved through our auspices. We were very lucky to find the negative of it at the CNC, which is the big place in France. They still had a negative, believe it or not. And it was preserved by them, and then I bought it and brought it to the Academy, who now holds all of my collection. And I work directly with, of course, the Academy, but I also work with UCLA, USC, anybody who will have me. But the best of my collection is sitting at the Academy. Unfortunately, we have been able to find many, many materials throughout the country and throughout the world, because usually what happens is that a print lands up in Russia and nobody's going to ship it back in its distribution. And so it shows up like 40 years later, maybe, in somebody's collection somewhere on the other side of the earth. And a good part of my work is research, because it's thanks to the archives throughout the world and collectors, the people that I used to hate who had, 16 millimeter prints stuck underneath their bed, who had stolen them usually from a television entity in the old days, turned out, of course, to be exceptionally useful for me at this juncture, because I was able to find stuff that I never could have found otherwise, especially on a lot of the films that never had any real international distribution at all. I mean, something like Girls in Chains never became a classic.
Believe it or not, Girls in Chains is a woman in prison film from way back. That didn't start in the 80s and 70s.
No. We had a sexy film already at PRC. So I think I've given enough of my giving.
Oh, we're going to hear a lot more from you, but I'm going to move it over to your right. Why are you here, Noah?
Because I spent my teenage years about 10 miles away from here, so it's just a return home. That's why I'm here.
Wow.
To be with you all tonight. No, I also happen to have collaborated very closely with Arianne on the biography that's now been given away with these brilliant answers to the trivia questions concerning Edgar G. Ulmer. And about a little over a year ago, in January of 2004 at DG Wills in La Jolla, California, we all spent an evening together there, and that's when we met Miguel, and that's when we learned about his work as a programmer. And
I don't know, that's kind of fuzzy.
Well, and as a horror film maven, and that's essentially why I'm here. So, and to enjoy with you this exquisite 35 millimeter print of Bluebeard, and talk a bit about it beforehand with you. And
I think we want to hear about Ulmer's output as a whole. And you'll see, I've got it all right here. The first thing I actually want to talk about is something a little more philosophical, and that's drive. When I read your biography and when you and I speak about Edgar G. Ulmer, the first thing I think about is this festival is a celebration of independent film, and I see that coming straight from Edgar G. Ulmer, because this is a man who was given very little resources and still managed to make films and was relentless at making films. He was highly prolific. So what drives some people to create and spend their lives telling stories even through adversity?
Well, I think that adversity is the mother of most of these kind of independent films, as the person exposes the issues that they will never comprehend fully and examine their interiors that usually have been damaged to a good extent. And of course, he is a child of the First World War. And his father died when he was like 10 years old. And to give you an idea of the kind of trauma that he faced, he was sent at that age to Innsbruck to bring his father's coffin back, because his mother was busy in Vienna taking care of the other children that she had, his sisters and his brother. If you can visualize a 10-year-old boy bringing back his father in a coffin, this was his experience from the early years. He stood on the bread lines that were part of the tragedy of the fact that the Austrians lost the war. And there was no food or Marshall Plan like we have today. And he was literally sent away to Sweden by an I think it was at that point some kind of who was it?
It was under the joint auspices of the Hoover Commission and a Jewish aid organization that sent him and his siblings to Sweden in the late years of the First World War, when his mother Henrietta could no longer care for the children.
No, she could no longer, feed them. The rationing was so desperate. I mean, they were given like one loaf of black bread. And, they would cut that in half. And the bad story that I heard in my childhood from all of the sisters and the brother, aside from Edgar, was that she would take half for herself and have the 4 children slice up the other half. I mean, they were desperate and starving. So I think that he was very damaged. He was traumatized. And he was examining this, part of himself and the cruelty that was around. He was a director that I think was attracted to mot d'ordre, which Noah can tell you about.
Well, I mean, the connection that I'd actually like to speak of more directly is between the first film that you referenced in your trivia question, namely The Black Cat of 1934, and the film that we're about to watch. Because from the time that his first venture into his first foray into horror in the Universal Horror Cycle in 34 with Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff in The Black Cat.
You must be indulgent of Dr. Verdigast's weakness. He is the unfortunate victim of one of the commoner phobias, but in an extreme form. He has an intense and all-consuming horror of cats.
Soon after that, he was already slated to direct Bluebeard, and it was announced in the trade press. And then he fell out of favor with Carl Laemmle. But the point that I think that's worth bringing up in terms of facing adversity and dealing with this sort of working through certain traumas, whether it's the First World War in the case of The Black Cat, or other traumas, going back in this case to Faust, actually, to this kind of this over-ambitious artist figure in the character played by John Carradine, and Morel, as he's called in the film, vis-a-vis this Mephistolian figure played Lemarte, as he's called in the film Bluebeard we're about to watch, played by Ludwig Stössel, who's you may know him from. He's Herr Leuchttag in that brief exchange in Casablanca, the such much, when sweetness, dear, how much, such much. Those are his few lines in Casablanca, but he plays this Mephistolian figure. And then you have this Margareta character played by Gene Parker, who'd also been in another film at PRC just before with Edgar, directed by Edgar Ulmer called Tomorrow We Live. All of these, specifically these 2 films, I think are really wrestling with certain demons. In the first case, the demon of the First World War. In the second case, I think it's just this larger Germanic lineage of the Faust story from Goethe and even before. And I think that he, even though he came to this country rather early as a youngster, he was just 20 years old. I think he brought with him those demons, so to speak, here at this horror film festival of yours, and I think he was in fact wrestling with many of these demons his whole life. The trauma that Arianne described so vividly, the bread lines, and just this extraordinary scarcity, austerity during the war years in Vienna. And then even after, you mentioned being born and needing to, I don't know how you put it, but basically scrape together enough money for the production that they were then working on, which is the first of 4 Yiddish pictures, Green Fields from 1937. His whole life was about, talk about independent cinema and sort of the predicament the existential predicament, the exigencies of being an independent filmmaker. You're always, whether you're putting it on credit cards today or whether you're searching, mortgaging, as it was called Mortgage Hill, the home on Kings Road.
Oh, we mortgaged it every time that he was ready to do something.
No Kickstarter.
No, not yet.
No.
Alas.
Fortunately, I can even remember the guy at the Bank of America who was his friend, who he would go back and forth with getting the mortgage, because as soon as he would get something finished and he was working on something, I mean, he didn't get that much money, even when he was at PRC. And he only had a contract, really, at the end.
With Bluebeard. But Bluebeard, he signs a 1-year contract with Bluebeard. And this comes right on sort of hot on the heels of Jive Junction, which was one of the quickies that he made for PRC. He wasn't especially proud about this, and he was trying to wrestle with another demon, which was commercialism.
Right.
He didn't just want to make movies for the sake of commercialism. He wanted them to have something artistic, some sort of aesthetic premium that he could feel actually proud of. And in that regard, he's very much aligned with the Carradine character in this film, and this, the Mephistophelan pact. Yeah, there we go.
That's it.
This pact with the devil that Carradine makes in selling his art. He's a sort of frustrated painter in this film. And Ulmer was not proud of certain films that he had to make because he had to put food on the table. This was a film that was actually kind of a prestige film for PRC. It was a film that when it appeared, the Hollywood Reporter really hailed it as a major picture, even though it was made for this little, shoestring budget. At PRC, sometimes its initials thought to represent pretty rotten crap. And this, however, was one that carried, unlike Detour, I was really surprised that nobody yelled out that movie, but unlike Detour, perhaps is among his best-known films, this is a budget that's almost twice that. It's $170,000 for Bluebeard, which is a big budget.
Oh, yeah, but the film he made just before, it was $10,000.
Exactly.
$10,000. That, and these things were shot in very few days, those $10,000 things.
Here he had 19 days. So
yes, this was the big film.
6-day pictures, he'd done these, 2-day pictures, and here he had 19 days and $170,000.
Out of curiosity, do you know the number for The Black Cat?
Oh, yeah.
It's 100 and change. It's about a third of what they spent on Frankenstein and I think a quarter of Dracula, if I get that right.
But it was the most successful picture that year.
In 1934, it was the highest grossing picture at Universal.
So, exceptional things happened, but that didn't help him any because he was already fooling around with my mother and he got blackballed. So you don't fool around with married ladies.
Yeah, how do you feel about us talking about the blackball story?
I feel fine about it. Nobody's alive anymore.
All right, so Ulmer came, he worked on a major studio film, The Black Cat, for Universal Pictures, Uncle Carl Laemmle's studio. What happened? Why didn't he make another film?
You start.
I'll start? Okay. At the time, Ulmer had already worked in the art department at Universal for a number of years. He directed two real westerns with Willie Wyler.
Yeah, I have to intersperse only to say that people don't realize he was an art director from the time he was 18, we have established, until he was already 28 or 29. The man had a full career. He would have never shifted except for the fact that Murnau was killed in an accident. He had worked on Sunrise. Maybe some of you know. How many of you know what Sunrise is? Okay.
And all the rest of you need to see it.
Yes, it's one of the great classics, and one of the last silent films that was made. It's an unbelievably wonderful film, and he worshipped Murnau. And he would never, I don't think, have even thought of directing if he had lived. He would have continued being part of his troupe, because he had made quite a few films with him. But it wasn't to be. And I think that it is why we first see him even conceiving that he would be working with people in Universal and learning his craft as a director. I mean, he started on these little two-reel westerns,
Yeah, and so when he was tapped to direct this, he was a mere 29 years old. This was his chance to direct at a major studio. This was what seemed to be an auspicious start for a very, very promising career as a young emigre director in Hollywood. He happened to fall in love with Shirley, then Alexander, born Kessler, but called Castle, who was Uncle Carl Laemmle's beloved nephew, Max Alexander. And Uncle Carl Laemmle, who is Ogden Nash Jr., once quipped, had a big family, and everybody would gather around his table on Sunday for these big, lavish Sunday lunches. Ulmer was there. Shirley was there next to Max Alexander. Max Alexander was very, very close with Carl Jr. And once the word got out that Edgar had run off with Shirley, the plans to make Bluebeard, which was slated to be a Universal picture.
There was already artwork done on it.
Yeah, immediately.
The posters existed.
Immediately scrapped. So that's how he became blackballed. It was for love, not for politics. Though in the 40s, he definitely was working with plenty of fellow travelers, if not card-carrying.
Yeah,
members.
he didn't believe in any government. He didn't trust any established government. He felt that they all were, and the minute they get power, I don't care whether they're socialist, communist, or capitalist. He felt that the thing that became important was their own power, no longer really caring about people. And so he had very little trust in any established anything. So he was smart enough not to join the Communist Party, although he was a very socialist-minded man.
Miguel,
Yes.
if I could just,
Please.
if it's not too tedious and not too academic, there is a lovely citation from the Hollywood Reporter when this film was released.
For Bluebeard.
For Bluebeard, which
Absolutely,
I think gives you a
yeah.
sense of this trajectory from 1934 to 1944, so a full decade, from the Black Cat to Bluebeard, and this long waiting period, and wow, is it a circuitous route to get to Bluebeard. But the review is really important, I think, for understanding the achievement of somebody who was working with such modest means and who managed to, well, as at least the Brothers Grimm would have it, spin gold out of straw. So here we have it. It says, "It has been the avowed and advertised purpose of PRC for some time to lift itself above the status of an organization devoted to the making of lower budget films and strike out for a better trade by pouring into the market films with a flexible budget, which means, of course, that cost is not the consideration as compared with quality. PRC has done this with Bluebeard. It is the kind of picture any company or any producer would like to release. It is a class product from start to finish, with every opportunity to entertain, regardless of expense, utilized to the fullest. In comparison with other movies with the same premise, it is head and shoulders superior. Producer Leon Frumkes and his associate Martin Mooney have taken pains to see that no detail in whatever department was overlooked in the making of this film a somber, gripping melodrama that moves towards its conclusion relentlessly. Edgar Ulmer's direction is studied and exact. There is a gentleness and an understanding permeating the entire film that can be attributed to him." Not until Truffaut writes his loving review of The Naked Dawn do you get this sort of press, and that's a full decade later.
I have to add just one little thing that I think is very important. That is that the cinematography in this film is unique. It's really wonderful. And it was done by Eugene Shuftan. Do any of you know, would you raise your hand if you've ever heard of Shuftan? He was an incredibly gifted cinematographer and had actually worked on the very first film that Dad co-directed.
Mention am Sonntag.
Yeah, People on
He
Sunday.
was the old man on the set. He was 34, the rest were in their 20s.
And he was a very funny guy, if you're even interested in that. But later on, he never could get into the union here. So he was working always out of New York or Paris. And he got to do this film because Dad really covered it, you know, to a certain extent at the first beginning area because he had another director.
Yeah, I think he's credited on this one, if I'm not mistaken, as production designer, or they would give.
But
him
he's the real
He's the cinematographer.
He's the cinematographer, and Dad always used him if he could, because he really. My mother and Shuftan and Erdodi were the magic of Ulmer at PRC. These were three people which he really depended on.
Can you talk about Erdodi and who that is?
Well, Erdodi was a Hungarian who had come to this country, and he worked at PRC with Dad, and he had a tremendous background. He was not, just a guy a schlepper who was hired as a music guy, like at the studios. This was a man that his father had been the last living student of Liszt, okay? And he had, conducted huge orchestras and things like that. So he had a really fantastic background. And of course, Dad and he became extremely close. And unfortunately, before Dad, when he moved away, from PRC, just in that period, Erdodi died. So he was older than Dad. He came from an older generation.
Did he compose the music on Bluebeard? Was that?
I believe,
yes.
He's responsible for Bluebeard.
Yeah.
He's
sure is.
Certainly responsible for Detour. He's responsible for, and as Arianne said, yes, when Ulmer was asked late in life in his two-part interview with Peter Bogdanovich which of the films he considered to be among his best, he said you could tell this by the cinematographer that I worked with, namely Eugen Triftan. And he was extremely, extremely indebted to Erdodi as well in terms of music. And in fact, the connection to Liszt, he gave a baton that so this is Leo Erdodi gave to Ulmer a baton that Erdodi's father had received directly from Liszt. And when he would conduct, when he would direct, he would hold the baton as if he were conducting. And when it came to working with Hedy Lamarr on The Strange Woman, he would also use the baton to smack her ankles when she wasn't delivering the lines.
Do you remember the time I'm sorry, you just mentioned The Strange Woman and Hedy Lamarr, and I remember you did this great impersonation of Ulmer. When he lost his mind at Hedy Lamarr.
Yeah, that's later. That's when he works with her over in Europe on The Love of Three Queens, one of the few pictures that he stormed off of. He was very, very devoted to whatever he worked on, and it was very rare that he gave up. In this instance, he gave up after working with her on one of the three installments of this film known as The Love of Three Queens, and she would not. How does the scene go? She would not stay within the frame as he wanted the shot to be composed. And worse than that, she was working with a young actor, and she kept on grabbing his head, and she would pull his head towards her bosom, and he could not get the shot. And there is just this outrageously funny scene that is reported in the young actor's memoirs, and I'm blanking on his name at this very moment, but where he imitates the accent, where he's Miss Lamarr, if you will not take this boy's head out of your bosom, I will have to make the shot in a double. It will be a double, not a single shot. It will be a double. And he had this very booming voice, if you hear in the interviews with Peter Bogdanovich, and this very strong Teutonic accent. Dickie Moore, who just passed away last week, who starred in Jive Junction, the picture just before this, he worked with Ulmer on Jive Junction. And he said he was a wonderful man. His accent was really, really hard to understand for a young actor. And this was true certainly of him. It was true of a lot of these refugees working in Hollywood. And yes, if you in the biography, there's a long passage that recaptures that scene with Hedy Lamarr, where he eventually, I think, he bites into his arm because he's so frustrated.
I think we're going to have to start wrapping things up.
Yes, I'm afraid so.
But to really get us into Bluebeard, let's talk about what you might know about Ulmer's relationship with John Carradine and what it was like working with him? Are there any stories?
Oh, you know plenty of stories.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know whether it's important for you to know it.
Well, it's fun.
Yes, I think it's fun. Are you bored by now? Okay.
Those are some good stories.
Well, I was a little girl when that picture was made. I think I was, at that point, I was like 8 or 9.
That's right.
And Carradine was running away from his first wife, who was trying to get him to pay child support. Now, he was as poor as Dad was. So part of the deal to get him to do this picture was that Carradine lived with us. And so did his son, David, who was also Jack Jr. I mean, changed his name so that there wouldn't be two, Johns and running for the parts, because it was confusing. But
He was known as the man who came to dinner, right?
he was known as the man who came to dinner, because my
Did you guys
mother...
hear that in the back?
The man who came to dinner, because my mother thought he'd never go away. I mean, he came to dinner and he stayed for the whole production, because he didn't have the money also to stay at the Garden of Allah, which was where he had been staying with Sonia, who is the lady in this film that plays the jealous girl of the puppeteer. So you will be seeing her also. I was the flower girl in Shakespearean costume when Carradine married her.
Soon after this picture.
Soon after this picture. And so we had a lot of fun together.
He saved you at the Garden of Allah, right?
Yes, I would have been dead. I would never have been here if Carradine hadn't jumped in the water in the pool, because my mother was so, distracted that she didn't notice that I had lost my swimming wings and that I was going to the bottom of the pool.
I gotta interject. All right, can I borrow that? If in that time a person who knew who John Carradine was in the pool and saw John Carradine diving in after them, I think they'd rather drown. Oh God, it's Dracula.
So I think that's enough of the stories. I want to show you this film, which was one of Dad's favorite films.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite films. John Carradine is outstanding. The music, that's why I asked about Erdodi in this. Yeah, so it's really great, particularly with the puppet scenes, which uses classic Faust.
Yes. Faust.
Right.
Yes.
So really pay attention to that.
That's Gounod. Thank you very much.
Good.
Yeah. This is really terrific.
Thanks for listening to the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. Check back every Thursday for film reviews and Fridays for interviews. This was another special edition podcast from the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival that took place over the weekend at the Museum of Photographic Arts in Balboa Park. Make sure you subscribe to the Cinema Junkie podcast on iTunes so you don't miss an episode. I have some scary good ones coming up in October. Thanks again for spending time and sharing my celluloid addiction. Till our next Film Fix, I'm your resident cinema junkie, Beth Accomando.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Paint Care, offering households and businesses in California more than 800 leftover paint drop-off sites for recycling. Quantities of 100-plus gallons of paint may qualify for a large volume pickup. Learn more at paintcare.org.